Jocelyn.
Hi.
Lovely to meet you both.
Yes, thank you so much for joining. I love your red lip. So pretty.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it helps brighten up brighten up my look on an evening. It's
Yes.
rainy evening here in Portland.
Well, that feels
Hmm.
on brand for Portland. Definitely.
Yeah, is that where you're from originally? Or
No, I married a man from Portland and we moved here about 2 years ago.
Mm.
And I'm getting used to the climate, but I love everything else about the city.
Yeah. I was
Yeah.
reading a little bit in your history and it seems everywhere that was mentioned, it seems like you're always near a beach.
It has worked out that
Chosen.
way. I haven't done my time in the Midwest, but maybe someday.
I would be
Um,
curious to see if you feel landlocked when you're there, if you had to live there.
yeah, I really don't know. I think there's so much to explore in this country. It's been a minute since I've driven cross country, but I love to take in the changing landscape and meet people from all different cities. You know, I haven't done the northern route. I usually do the southern route when I drive cross country.
Oh, interesting.
We
Yeah.
drove to Portland, I'm trying to think, in 2009. I took the kids and we went to Multnomah Falls.
Oh yeah. Mhm.
So we had a good time. That was when I was 17, I had been to 45 states and I've only added one since I was 17. And we were so close to
Right.
Oregon. I told my husband, just dip in. So we did.
Yes. So you can count it.
Good.
Yes.
Cool.
Well, and you saw a glorious waterfall. You picked a good
Yes.
one.
We had some good pictures for sure.
I love it. Well, great. Well, we're going to go ahead and start if that sounds okay. I want to welcome everyone to Fabled's Book Club. I am Allison Frenzel, one of the co-owners, and I have Elizabeth Barnhill, our adult book buyer with us, our just extraordinaire. She is amazing at picking books and she gets to pick books for all of this book club. And I feel like I'm the one that benefits because I just get like read the best books. And we're so excited to have Joselyn Takacs. Is that am I saying it correctly?
Tachus, I think. Tachus?
Takacs.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes. Mhm.
With us for Pearce Oysters. And hopefully you guys all read along. And if you didn't, fair warning, we are going to talk about spoilers. So if you've not finished the book, feel free to exit out and do not worry because we will send a recording of this 24 hours later and you can watch that whenever you want, whenever you finish the book. But that's the best part. I think about our book club is it's not so necessarily an advertisement for the book. We're already sold on it. It is to really ask the author why he or she did what and when and all of those good questions. So if you have a question, the chat is open. You can feel free to type there and we'll try to get to it. We have questions as well. So hopefully we hit on a couple that maybe you have in the back of your mind. And if you can stick around at the end because we will be announcing our next book club, which will be in January. We're skipping December because of December, but so it's worth sticking around for sure. So without further ado, I'm going to let Elizabeth introduce our author.
All right, so Joselyn Takacs holds a PhD in creative writing and literature from the University of Southern California and an MFA in fiction from Johns Hopkins University. Her fiction has appeared in Gulf Coast, Narrative, Tin House, Harvard Review, The Rumpus, Diagram, Columbia, A Journey of Art and Literature, and elsewhere. She has published interviews and book reviews in the Los Angeles Book Review of Books and Entropy. Joselyn has taught writing at the University of Southern California and Johns Hopkins University. She lived in New Orleans at the time of the 2010 Deepwater Horizon spill, and in 2015, she received a grant to record the oral histories of Louisiana oyster farmers in the wake of the environmental disaster. She currently lives in Portland, Oregon with her husband. And I'm so thankful that you got to join us tonight. I was very, very interested in this book. I do love a climate disaster or any kind of a disaster story. And I we always travel to the Gulf Coast every year and remembered this very dearly. So I was intrigued, and just the writing was so beautiful. And I knew immediately that we wanted to pick it for our book club. And I wanted to ask, it said that you had a grant from Baylor University, which I thought was kind of interesting. That's 1 mile away from our store. So we're big Baylor fans here.
I'm also a big Baylor fan. I mean, this novel was made possible because of Baylor University's grant. I applied after I did one interview with an oyster farmer. I applied to record the stories of oyster farmers across Louisiana, and Baylor was wonderful. They provided training, oral history training, and all of those oral histories are a part of their online archive now,
I
which
love that.
yeah, I think is wonderful, especially to provide people with the opportunity to hear stories in people's own voices,
Mhm.
especially with talking with folks from across Louisiana. You have these really beautiful dialects that we're losing as time goes on. So I think it's wonderful that that's preserved too.
And I have 2 degrees from Baylor. My husband went to law school at Baylor. My daughter's at Baylor. My brother went to Baylor, and my father taught at Baylor. So we are definite Baylor Bears. So I'm
Yes.
glad to hear that.
Elizabeth and I are actually both professors' daughters from Baylor.
That's
So
right.
we are,
Get out.
yes,
Yeah. How fun.
different departments though,
Mhm.
for sure.
Well, can you just for our audience tonight, Jocelyn, can you just kind of do a brief recap of what the story is about?
Sure. So this is a family story, and it's a troubled family story. So this is a family that doesn't get on, really even in the best of times, and they own a locally famous oyster company in Louisiana, and they've been in operation for 90 years. And the patriarch of the family has died and left the business to his 2 sons. The eldest son is running the business on his own, Jordan, without his father's success. And you've got a younger brother living in New Orleans as a bohemian musician, and he's living off of the family business without adding much. So the story is told from their perspective, but also from their mother's perspective, May, who is adrift after she's lost her husband 4 years earlier.
Mhm.
It's interesting. Well, I would love to hear what made you interested in this story, and just talk a little bit about your writing background.
I was living in New Orleans at the time of the spill. I moved to New Orleans after college, and I knew then that I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't have a clear idea of how to make it happen. And I was working odd jobs, teaching French and serving food in the French Quarter of New Orleans when the oil spill happened, which was, the largest environmental disaster in U.S. history, and the largest accidental oil spill in world history. And we were all gobsmacked by the enormity of the disaster. And I heard an interview at the time of the spill, maybe about a month or so after the spill began, and it was with an oyster farmer whose business was closing down. And I just thought that it was a tragedy that you could be so subject to an industrial accident, and you could lose your livelihood, and really your family's legacy as well. Because I didn't know then, and was really interested to learn that oyster farmers grow sort of their crops in reefs, and they have different reefs in different stages of production. So an oil spill is posed to wipe out an oyster farmer's production for the next 2 to 5 years. And it was longer in the case of the BP oil spill. But I didn't know I was going to write the novel back in 2015, 2010. It wasn't until 2015 that I received the grant from Baylor. And that was where my journey with this novel began, this very long journey from that research stage to publication now 9 years later. So I've grown a lot as a person and as a writer. And I had to learn, not only how to write a novel, this is my first novel, but how to weave in research and how not to overwhelm the story with research, which took quite a few drafts.
Well,
Imagine.
what made you decide after doing these oral histories that you wanted to write it as a fictionalized account instead of a nonfiction? And what were the how did you navigate writing a fiction that was loosely based in reality? Even the name of the town is different, everything is a little bit altered. So is there what was that like navigating that?
By changing the name of the town, I gave myself a bit of creative license. I found, especially because I was a young writer, that it was difficult to take liberties and make things up. I knew that I had the timeline of the spill to work with. But I needed to sort of gain some confidence to make up events. Like there's, for instance, a public forum in the novel that happens with a marine toxicologist, and that was inspired by interviews I'd read during the spill, but is a fictional event. And it was really giving myself liberties to make things up, to really write this as a novel that where I found its heart. There's another part of your question that I feel like I didn't touch on.
Well, I think that's why you decided to make it fiction instead of a nonfiction. But I think you did unless there's something else you'd like to add.
There is something else. I mean, I think, unfortunately, I couldn't have sold a nonfiction novel about this topic, or nonfiction book about this topic. I think nonfiction is very hard to sell, especially this far out from an environmental disaster. And so I think that would have been quite difficult, even though the effects of the spill were very real at the time of my writing and remain today. And then in addition, fiction's just my love. It's what I went to school for. It was my dream to write a novel that marries in an environmental disaster with a family story. So that's why.
I'm glad you did it that way. It worked out perfectly.
Yes. Let's deep dive a little bit into the oyster industry. Tell us, were there any interesting things you learned about it? And do you feel like it's recovered from the spill? I mean, we had, I wonder if the industry was recovering from Hurricane Katrina, which was devastating. And then this happened 5 years later.
Well, you're absolutely right. The industry was dealt sort of a devastating blow during Katrina, and they had just recovered by the time the oil spill happened in 2010. And it's taken a long time for the oyster industry to recover. So to sort of put it in perspective, the Louisiana catch of oysters today is still below where it was before the spill. And there's a bunch of factors that go into that. One of the main ways that the oil spill affected oyster growth is that the larva spat The baby oysters were not surviving after the spill. And the oyster farmers that I spoke with believe that's because of the combination of the chemical dispersant that was used to clean up the spill with the oil. And that problem, remains to this day. And how oyster farmers have combated that is that they basically needed to cover any reef that they had with new, fresh oyster shells or crushed cement. Because if the prior material had been soaked with the dispersant or the oil, the oyster larva was not surviving. And over the years, oyster farmers have been doing just that, but it's slow and expensive, very expensive to transport and then spread that oyster culture. There are other quirky things I could share about the oyster industry, but I think people always want to know how the industry is doing, and oyster farmers are very resilient, although they wish they didn't have to be so quite as resilient as they've had to be.
Well, speaking of the chemicals and the oil, the Men's Health, the ones who've decided to go and clean up the mess, a lot of them ended up having massive health problems. Did you encounter that in your oral histories, and how are these people doing now? I guess 15 years later?
There have been no successful lawsuits now for medical compensation for cancers likely linked to exposure during the cleanup process. Maybe that will change. It took a long time after the Exxon Valdez spill for one of those lawsuits to be successful. I write about that in the novel too. But it wasn't something that people talked about in their interviews with me. And, I had a really interesting interview with a chemist who specializes in toxic exposure in communities in Louisiana. And she asked me if anyone had told me about becoming sick. And I said, no one has. And she said, well, they won't. People will tell you how their businesses have been affected, but they won't tell you if they're feeling any effects, just as a matter of pride, which I found, it seems true to me, and I found it chilling.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would love to talk to you about the Pearce family and how well you did fleshing them out, making them multidimensional, and the reader couldn't help but root for them. And that was definitely a choice as far as making this more of a family drama than an eco thriller, like eco disaster thriller. Did you find yourself in that crossroads, or what? Tell me about your choice on that.
The family was such a delight to get to know. May's character in particular, I had the most fun writing. Her sections came out the quickest and required the least amount of revision. But then these two brothers that don't get along at all, I enjoyed writing their scenes together because it was kind of like having a conversation with myself. In some ways, they're on different sides of the political spectrum, and I was just sort of able to air their political beliefs and have them talk to one another, and explore, how your worldview affects your interpretation of environmental disaster, which I found came up in my interviews over and over again.
Yeah, and that was my next question about the boys. I have two grown sons myself. They're only 2 years apart and could not be any more different. Total 180. I don't know how they shared the same womb. Um, but it was interesting reading about their difficult relationship, and I really felt for May trying to navigate their relationship and kind of keep the family together. Did you find one of the boys a little easier to write than the other one?
Yeah, I did. I found Benny was easier to write for me. And I know he does some very unlikable things in the novel, but his experience living in New Orleans was drawn from my time in New Orleans. I was also a part of an activist community in New Orleans, and I am an enormous fan of New Orleans music, and so I enjoyed writing a musician.
Mhm.
But the family disagreement, the disagreements within the family about the business and also just about life, they really propel the novel forward for me, and provided a lot of fodder for the novel. So I think it was difficult for me to find out what was an authentic way for these two people to come together through their experience. And that took some revision to get there, to land in a place that I felt was believable for their characters.
They reminded me a little of the prodigal son. It's like one of them was taking care of everything while the other one was off doing whatever. And yeah, I really appreciated that part of the story.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's I love a prodigal son story.
Yeah.
I do.
I'm the
It's
oldest, so I'm like, you know what? They need to both have their fair share, and it's not fair how that's happening. So yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Let's talk about May and how she seemed to be having kind of a mid to late midlife crisis following the death of her husband and kind of seeing life beyond the family business. Can you expand on that aspect of the book?
Oh, sure. Yeah, May really is in crisis, and in some ways, the spill gives her just what she wants, which is both of her boys home
Yeah.
working together, and new love comes into her life, and it's very exciting, and she thinks that her life is sort of been righted almost, and that's not, it doesn't turn out how she hopes, because the spill doesn't turn out how anybody hopes. But I wanted to have sort of a redemptive sort of path for her. So, in the epilogue, she does end up in a better place than she is in the beginning of the novel, although she does have quite a hard journey that she goes through.
It's not the mother way, isn't it? So let's talk about the women. Of course, I loved May, and I really appreciated her relationship with Kiki and trying to kind of, again, I have a young daughter-in-law, and just trying to navigate that, and make sure everything is okay. Their cultural divide is so different, and I'm sure even just trying to get used to your son being in love with a woman, and how that was interesting to navigate. So can we talk a little bit about the three women, and of course Cindy as well? Um, how did what was it like trying to write three women at the center of the story that were vastly different?
Um, I think it was fun for me to reflect on different aspects of womanhood, which I think that they embody, and they also, all characters are taken in some piece from the author. So Kiki is uh really analytical and no nonsense and driven, but a bit self-important at times. And May is a people pleaser and anxious and a bit of a fusser. And Cindy is, you know, has had a rougher road, and she's had to like develop a sharp tongue and call things like she sees it, particularly working at a bar, to, you know, to hold men to account day after day. So it was good fun for me to sort of get to live in their shoes at different parts during the novel, and see how their relationships with the Pearce men affected their plot lines, because
Yes.
they're all difficult in their unique ways.
Mhm. Yep.
I'd love to hear about the media's role in this novel, and if that subject came up in your oral histories. What are I'd also love to hear about the advantages and disadvantages of media coverage as you've done research, and how it affects the story itself.
I found this so interesting. Doing the research was just that the oyster farmers and these small towns were inundated with media in a way that they'd never had been before. Like one of the oyster farmers I met told me that he taught Anderson Cooper how to properly eat an oyster.
Wow.
And it felt to them like the whole world was watching, because it was. And so they were often taking reporters out on their boats and, you know, bearing witness to the disaster that was happening. That if you are someone like Jordan Pearce and you are uncomfortable really even making small talk, you can really struggle to have a reporter with you on your boat. So I'm not sure. There wasn't a lot of animosity towards the media, but I found it difficult initially to make connections with people, because there had been just so many of me, outsiders coming, hoping to capture the story of their experience. And so I slowly made connections with the men that I met, but usually after gaining the trust in one interview, somebody would say, "Oh, you can talk to my cousin," or "Let me give you so-and-so's phone number."
I imagine the poor rural Louisianan would have a hard time talking to one of the media elite, or just that it must be some sort of more of a distrust than being able to speak to them. But so it's interesting.
Yeah, I think some were more comfortable than others. Some of the oyster farmers, you know, are often in the media, sort of being a voice for the industry and the various lawsuits that the industry is involved in. It really depends on which oyster company we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's switch gears just a little bit and kind of talk about your writing journey and how this story took 9 years from the beginning to where we are now. Can you talk about the research? I know you are a research fiend, so let's talk a little bit about that. And also, was there anything interesting that you really, from all this research, that you wanted to put in the novel but just couldn't add any more to the story?
Yeah, you know, I thought when I started writing this book that maybe it needed to start on the Deepwater horizon. And so I'd written a chapter that takes place on the rig, and it was just unspecific. There was just so much texture that was missing from that chapter that I couldn't see how to make it work. fitting the novel together was quite a challenge. I had so many suggestions over the years, like maybe you should start at like a shareholders meeting for BP and then jump to the family. And my editor very strongly believed that it needed to start on the boat. I'd written a foreword for the novel, and that actually took place far in the future and at a funeral, and that didn't make the final cut. I found what needed to stay in the story, and what my revision journey was elevating the family's drama, and just choosing wisely what were going to be the inflection points of the spill that I was going to focus on. Because there are passages that didn't make the final cut that were there's just no life in the sentences, because I was trying to focus on accuracy over storytelling. And so that was my journey, learning how to write this novel. At first, I was really hamstrung and overwhelmed by the enormity of the disaster, and writing something that would speak to that. And I think it took me so long, I was just a bit paralyzed by what a big task I'd created for myself. And I think that also added a couple years. My next novel, I'll only let myself spend a couple years on it. On the drafting part, publishing takes a long time. My book was bought 2 years ago. And so it's been in its final stage for quite some time, but I think.
So yeah, I noticed that in your Wazibi books, so that's yeah, and yeah, Sherry Poozy and I are friends, Instagram friends. I saw her in the acknowledgments today, so that made me happy to see. But so Zibby bought it from your, I guess your editor was separate and apart from Zibby Books. Is that how that?
Oh, so my editor just made the case for the novel to the publisher. He read the novel first from the submission pile and was excited about it, and said to the rest of the company, read this one, which they did before they made the offer. But I'm grateful to him, because he's recognized the novel first.
Well, and I was going to show, I don't know if everyone has a hard copy or not, but in the hard copy, this is so great that there is a QR code in the book that has an author interview. It has reading questions. It has a Spotify playlist, and there's so much to it. So if you love the book, I would suggest to buy. I mean, if you haven't bought it yet, I would buy it, even just for that QR code. I thought that was such a great thing that the publisher added to the book.
Yeah,
Whole new world.
They're brilliant with marketing. They really are. I mean, because they're a new press, they've had to learn how to make their mark, and think about how they can compete with the larger presses, the more established presses.
Yeah, she's doing a great job. They're doing a great job at Zibby.
I think.
Dawson, I think I read, okay, your husband is a writer. Is he also an editor?
He's my editor.
Okay. I was going to ask that, because I can't imagine how that works in a marital relationship, to be like, this is terrible, change this. And you're like, that's my work. And especially as a debut author.
Yeah.
That?
I mean, I guess it's sort of the story of our romance. Because we fell in love and immediately started editing one another's work. And we still just read everything the other one writes, and now we're working on a screenplay together. So we're lucky. I am lucky because he is a very kind editor. He's he pulls his punches and says things as generously as he can. But we also we have the same taste, which is something that we bonded over immediately.
That's
I
great.
didn't
Well,
see that your husband was your editor. So I guess I'm glad you saw that, Allison.
I said it facetiously.
yes,
He's not, he
I guess
doesn't.
they go first through him and then through.
Okay, got it. Got it.
Yeah.
I was, oh, I really missed that. I also saw that one of the acknowledgements is you thanked Alice McDermott. Do you know Alice?
Yeah, she was my mentor at Hopkins.
Well,
She
I have to tell you, we have discovered that she was in my grandmother's first grade class. My grandmother
Really?
passed away in 1976, so it's been forever, but we figured that out, and I've always wanted to talk to her, or at least so you'll have to let her know that you taught to her first grade teacher's granddaughter. Small little world from Long Island. Yeah.
I was gonna say you must not be
I contain
so
multitudes.
confident.
Yes,
she does.
my that side of the family, and they read one of her books and realized that she was talking about Elmont and figured out that she was in my grandmother's first grade class. And I really want to tell her that, and I just don't have her contact. So if you would pass along that,
Pass it
I would like
along.
to say hello.
I will absolutely do that. I don't know when
Well,
I'll see her next, but hopefully soon.
Hopefully, yeah.
we at Fabled love debut authors. It's so fun just to champion books for people to discover and to see the process is that those books get discovered by other people, and movie rights are sold or whatever, big dreams like that. I'd love to hear what surprised you in your process. I know it's not like other authors in the fact that you received a grant and had to do so much research, but anywhere from getting the contract to the book tour, I'd love to hear more about that.
Oh, the book tour is every author's dream. We all want to go on a book tour, and just as time goes on, fewer and fewer of us get to go. Because I think that book tours don't sell as many books as they used to. So I felt really lucky that I got to go on a tour at all. And so many of my tour stops included fresh oysters. So we usually partnered with a local oyster farm, which made the event so special. And in New Orleans, one of the farmers that I interviewed brought his oysters, which he calls reef candy, to the reading. It was just a dream. And writing is a really solitary lifestyle, so getting on Zooms even and meeting new people, and as well as meeting new people in person, has just been a delight and world expanding in a way that I know I needed.
I love that. Well, can you tell us what you're working on next? You talked about a new thinking about a fiction, but I think, is that what you're working on now, or what's occupying your time?
I've got a few sort of pots on the stove. I'm working on a screenplay with my husband that's set in Hawaii about families vacationing together. And it's a comedy. And I'm working on some short stories, and I'm just waiting for that next idea for the novel. Waiting for the inspiration to strike for the next long story I need to tell.
Well, Chris in the chat asked a really good question about if you have plans for future work that incorporates an environmental issue with fictional relationships.
I'm sure I will. I think right now it's very therapeutic for me to be writing a comedy after writing a tragedy. But I'm going to keep coming back to environmentalism in my work.
Well, I say whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because we are super proud of you and want to just champion your work here at Fabled, and just absolutely loved this book. It's one of my favorites of the year, and I love selling it at the store.
Thank you for having me and for saying that. It's just been such a pleasure to to receive your message way back when and now be here talking to you. I hope my travels bring me to Waco and I can come into the bookstore one of these days and say hi.
Would absolutely love it.
Yes. And we just had a new oyster restaurant open too. So
Yeah,
they-
and Texas has got great oysters. Are you a fan of oysters?
I like oysters. Yes. I like lots of seafood for sure.
I could eat 2 dozen of them. It's my favorite. It's probably one of my very favorite foods. I had 8 of them at the new restaurant. They were delicious.
That's awesome. Well, Joselyn, thank you so much for joining us. This has been so great, and your book was wonderful. And we will be anticipating what is next. No pressure, because I know this one took a while. But we are going to introduce our next book. I'm going to let Elizabeth do that. And then in the chat, I'm going to put a link to sign up for it and a link for the book. And so you can purchase it easily there and then join us in January. And then Joselyn, you're also welcome to join us if you'd like. But I'll have Elizabeth tell us what we're reading next.
All right, so yes, we're taking December off, so you can just read all of your TBR. But in January, we will be speaking to Stephanie Booth about her fantastic book, Libby Lost and Found. And I just absolutely inhaled the book. It is funny, it's sweet, it's poignant, it's quirky, totally different than anything else I read this year. And we just can't wait to talk to her about the book. So buy it at Fabled. We've got lots of good copies, and it's another one that I have loved to sell. So we can't wait to see you in 2025.
Right. It's crazy. All right. Well, thank you so much, Joselyn. Thanks everybody for joining us. You'll receive a recording in 24 hours, and we hope to see you in January. Thanks so much.
But yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.